David Salerno is with us. He has worked for just about every single network. He is creator of Salerno Productions, worked with NBC, ESPN, Fox, NFL Network. The outfits go on, Al Jazeera, you name it. And he is one of the great storytellers in the game today. And we are going to look at his life, what he has done, what he has overcome, and what makes him inspirational. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor at Fox Sports Radio and a broadcaster for the USTA. David, appreciate you doing this. I know,
Thanks,
like we were
Bryan.
just talking about, you're changing, you're moving, what's going on in your life right now? It sounds
It
like
has
there's a
been
whole lot going on.
absolute chaos in the last year plus, Bryan. From mid-March of last year when the hammer blow of COVID struck, which affected freelancers like myself in a variety of powerful and often negative ways, managed to keep afloat and survive and take what gigs I could. And then my wife and I, had a good opportunity to find a plot of land in a nice town in northern New Jersey, build a home. We've just moved in last week. My two daughters have just started high school. My stepkids are in fifth grade. So it's two sets of twins, a new house, a new gig with Barstool right now, working during football season for them. So it is a little bit dizzying, to say the least.
Well, I'm so excited for you with Barstool and that opportunity. And what are you going to be able to do with them, and how you're able to exploit your talents to help bolster what they're doing?
Well, it's interesting you asked. They are such an interesting and fresh outfit. One of the things that attracted me to Barstool to begin with is that a guy that I trust and have always liked in the industry, a fellow named Sean Laughlin, is an executive producer there. He and I worked together at ESPN. He covered the NBA for ESPN. He worked for MLB Network. And it just so happened that the timing was right and my schedule was clear, and they were looking for some people to help them with a new venture. They are known largely more for fun, short form content. They've grown by leaps and bounds, as you know. It's refreshing that they have an attitude of, we're just going to be us. We're not going to be as constrained as the big network behemoths, and we're going to go and find our own way. But as part of that, they've decided that they're going to dip into some longer form storytelling. So myself and a few other former coworkers from ESPN, who now are freelance and have done a lot of different things, are going to be helping them produce a show called Coach Prime, which is about Deion Sanders and his efforts to grow the HBCU brand, the brand of Jackson State, and rise up this program in college football. And we're working with a great showrunner named Dana, who's been with Barstool for the last several years. And this fall season will be our second season. They had shot something in the spring. I don't know if you're aware, but a lot of HBCUs decided not to play in the fall. So they played a season in the spring. So now it's actually a second season this fall. So we're going to be diving in and looking into that. And it's exciting because Barstool is always looking to do interesting and different fun things. And now they are making a real intelligent and concerted effort with long-form storytelling. So I'm grateful and honored to be a part of the process for them for at least the next 3 months.
I want to look at, and David Salerno is with us, your storytelling instincts, because looking at your career, the features that you've done for all the different outfits that you've been a part of leading up to Barstool. And what is it about the way you would tell a story that you've been able to find what hooks the listener, the viewer? What is it about your style that captivates people and brings them in?
Well, that's a very flattering question, and I'm not sure I'd be able to speak for those people, but I'll tell you what I attempt to do often is two things. Number one, to put myself in the chair or the seat of the member of the audience or the listener or the viewer. Not just what I would do or my boss would like, but what might be compelling for them. To not always look at it with my producer hat on, but if I was a viewer, if I was watching, what would I enjoy? What would I find compelling? Number one, so I try to put myself in that view. And then number two is, how can I take my experiences at different places, artistic, nuance that I've learned from other people in the industry and that I've grown myself, and then also, items from my academic background, and synthesize those in a way that allows me to tell something in a creative way. For example, when I was working for DAZN recently, their first huge fight with Canelo Alvarez after he'd signed with them was against an English fighter named Rocky Fielding. So I took a speech that I loved that a former senator's son, who I went to school with at Northwestern, Tom Daschle, the former Senate majority leader, his son Nathan and I were close friends at Northwestern. He had, shortly after my father died, shared this bit of a speech from Teddy Roosevelt called "The Man in the Arena" with me. And I took that with me. I used it once when I was at ESPN, and years passed, and I loved it. I sold it to the executive producers at DAZN and used that speech as the opening tease of this mega event for Canelo Alvarez's first fight with DAZN at Madison Square Garden. So that's an example of me trying to take something from my past, or whether it's from my academics, from other things that I've learned from anyone from Tom Rinaldi to great producers like, Ben Hauser or Andrew Tennant and Jim Thompson at NBC. Those first two guys are at ESPN, and Ben's now at the WWE. And, try to make something my own, but always look at things, a creative way to tell a story, and not always settle for, oh, this is just standard tale about, X, Y, and Z. It's not always going to work. You're not going to bat 1,000 with these creative efforts or outlays. But the goal is to, like a good baseball hitter, you hit 300, 3 out of 10, you do those, you'll be doing great.
What is the biggest risk you have taken in trying to put together a story and you hit a home run with it, where you did something that perhaps wasn't common, that was you trying to push the envelope, and it actually panned out really well for you?
I have a great answer for you there. And I'm sure you're aware of the esteemed Jeremy Schaap.
Of course.
He was one of the best reporters in the business, a better human being even than he is a reporter, which is saying a lot. He was raised right. He and Nathan both from families of privilege and fame, but couldn't be more down to earth and real people. So I remember talking with him once at a lunch when we were in the field on the road for some story. I wouldn't even be able to tell you what it was, but I remember saying, what's, the white whale story that you want, that you haven't been able to get? And he said it was this hockey tale about this guy named Mike Danton, who was a Canadian who at the time was playing for the Blues, who was involved in a murder for hire plot. It's a very murky, complicated story that either involved his estranged father or, this former youth coach of his that presumably had Machiavellian influence over him, some kind of Svengali thing going on. Mike ended up getting arrested and having to go to jail because the individual who he tried to hire to do this hit was in fact a police dispatcher and was used as an undercover, operative in a sting operation to sort of, nab him. And he actually finished a game for the Blues against the San Jose Sharks, went back to the hotel after the game, and, the feds were waiting for him.
Wow.
And he eventually got out of jail, served his time, was a model citizen, saw a therapist, got himself, right in the head, and decided to go back to school in Canada. And he was going to a university in Halifax, Nova Scotia, became a straight A student, helped them to a national title, which, is still an accomplishment, even though, as we know, most young Canadians won't even play in college. It's not like America, where football and basketball players, baseball players still have to play a couple of years. So anyway, Jeremy was telling me this was the story he wanted to do. No one had ever been able to get Danton in an interview chair or his former coach, David Frost, in an interview chair. So Jeremy Schaap and I flew to Nova Scotia. We got in touch with the school, and we had Theo Fleury, a Hall of Famer, act as an advocate for us, because we told a very dark story about him suffering through child abuse at the hands of a former coach.
Sure.
And so we were able to get in touch with Danton, and he agreed to meet with Jeremy and I. So we flew all the way to Nova Scotia to meet him for dinner, not knowing what would happen. And we managed to convince him up to a point, but then we had to, take a few other steps. And we really had to be put through the ringer to even get a camera in front of him. And we did, and it worked great. But my boss at the time, Andy Tennant, pushed us to get Frost as well. Again, no one in Canada, it was a huge story in Canada. It was a big story here briefly. No one had ever been able to get them an interview chair. Frost and Danton, rehabilitated their relationship. And even though it's still unclear who really Danton thought was coming to kill him, that he had to have someone kill that person. It was still murky to this day.
Sure.
So at one point, Jeremy and I were able, by blind luck, because Danton at first wasn't comfortable connecting us with Frost or his wife. So we had to do a bit of a workaround. And through some random website called Hockey God Online or something on Facebook, I managed to connect with someone who, and then David Frost calls me out of the blue and agrees to meet with us for a meal, but he's living in Laguna Beach. So Jeremy and I have to fly to Los Angeles now, not knowing if this is going to work. So we finally get him to commit to sitting down with us. And Mike was, at that point, was comfortable enough, we thought, maybe not, to have David do the interview. Because David wanted Mike to be at least comfortable enough. So I had to hire a crew in LA, booked this like huge area in a boutique hotel that at the time was closed for the season. I have a camera crew setting up and standing by, not knowing what's going to happen. We rolled the dice completely. We sit down at lunch with him. Jeremy is very charming, very engaging in a very genuine way, as was I. And another coordinating producer who'd gone, I think, to the same high school as Frost, maybe, or Danton, was Canadian, came out with us to try to help a little bit. And we have this long lunch with Frost. And he says, all right, I think I'm comfortable doing this, but I've got to go to the gym. I promised my son I'd work out with him. My wife and I are going to get on a call with Mike just to make sure everything is okay. Give me the address of this place we're going, and I'll touch base with you. But still, I'm not counting my chickens before they hatch, because I know crazy things happen in this industry. Jeremy and I go back to where this hotel is, near Laguna Beach. He wants to go to like some little fancy grocery store. You know, we get him some snacks, get some snacks for the crew. Then we drop it off and we're outside. We're trying to go for a walk. I have a lot of nervous kinetic energy. Somehow I convinced Jeremy Shepp to get in a grocery cart, and I'm pushing him around some parking lot. This is true. Whether he remembers or admits it or not, I think both. But then all of a sudden, you know, my phone rings and it's David Frost. He says, okay, I want to double check the address. Mike's comfortable enough. My wife and I calmed him down. What's the address? And so I give it to him. I tell Jeremy, we're high-fiving, but I said, I'm still not counting my chickens where they hatch because he's not in the interview chair.
Yeah.
So, of course, waiting for him to get there, every minute feels like an hour to me.
Wow.
Jeremy I am more intense, passionate, kinetic. Jeremy Shepp is far more chill, relaxed. Mm-hmm. He's trying to calm me down. Finally, we're waiting outside. I let my crew know, hey, he could be here soon. You guys literally have to be ready to go. And I told them, you know, sometimes people show up and you fiddle with things for 5, 10, 15 more minutes. I said, there's to be no fiddling. You have to be perfect. I'm like, this is what he looks like. I showed them Google images. This is the tint of his white skin. You've got to get the lighting perfect. He sits down. The audio guy literally has to be on him like white on rice. Get him in the chair and we go. There's no fiddling at all. So I let them know they're ready. Finally, he shows up. Jeremy and I are there to greet him in the parking lot. We go upstairs. I'm still concerned that something might go wrong. And he goes and he meets the crew. And he asked to talk to Jeremy Shepp and I, you know, off somewhere else. And he, you know, asked if Jeremy and I would go have some drinks with him first across the street at the bar. And Jeremy, fortunately, was like, David, we don't want to do that. We're here. Let's do it. We can have some drinks afterwards. That's just not an appropriate thing. David, Salerno, and I, we're not supposed to do that, you know, on the job. So he would, I don't remember, I'm paraphrasing, but he essentially cajoled and charmed David into being like, okay, he's fine. And Dave said some things like that he wanted to get across. We're like, no problem. I'm getting texts and emails from my bosses in Connecticut. What's happening? And I'm not really responding. I'm like, guys, I'll let you know when I know. Audio guy is literally right there on the balcony waiting, hovering, gets the stuff on David Frost. And as soon as he drops the little mic thing through, I'm like, almost there. Jeremy brings him in, sits him down. They're getting like set to roll. I take a picture of it and just send that picture to my bosses with no caption and nothing else. And like, hey, we pulled it off. We did it. And it was a brilliant 3-hour interview. Frost was incredibly compelling. Jeremy gave a tremendous interview. The feature story ended up getting nominated for an Emmy in the investigation category. We narrowly lost to HBO, which is a heartbreaker for me. But that's still one of the favorite stories myself or Jeremy's ever worked on. And I remember this feeling, because it's rare in life when you know that something near perfect happened that you were involved in, whether it was you're falling in love or you got into your dream school or something like that. We're walking into the car with the tapes, now ready to go have some drinks with David Frost. And I'm hugging and high-fiving Paul and Jeremy, Paul Grant, who was at the time a coordinating producer, the one from Canada who helped us with hockey stuff. And we're like, we somehow did this. No one has ever been able to do this in all the years that this has happened. No one's ever got them an interview chair. We didn't get one, but we got both guys. Both required long travel just to like sit down and convince these people. And not only did everything come together there in the pre-production phase, but in the post-production phase as well. My editor at Bluefoot Entertainment in West Hartford, Connecticut, though I think they're now in Avon, Tim Horgan, did a tremendous job. And that still to this day is one of the highlights of my career. Everything that went into it and everything we had to try to pull off, and all these weird little moments in the field that rarely have I ever had to try to attempt before.
There were so many times as I hear that where you could have been like, okay, it's going to happen, but you were cautious. You wanted everything. You had to have them in the interview chair before it all happened, because you've probably been in situations where you might have an interviewee say, yeah, I'll do this. And for one reason or another, he or she pulls out, and then it leaves you in a really tough situation, which I'm sure that you've had to deal with at times in that pursuit of that great story.
Oh, without question, that's happened before. And also that's, to be honest, an inherent part of my personality as well, to not count my chickens before they hatch.
Sure.
I've been like that since the third grade when, at the book fair, I was promised that I'd get the Raiders of the Lost Ark Random House hardbound book that I desperately wanted. And this one lady's like, well, there's this one kid that was supposed to come in and get it, but he hasn't yet. But he's sick. We have to give him a chance to come back in. But maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't. And then like thinking I'm going to get the book and then not. And so ever since that point, and like, when I was 10 years old or 9 years old, I never count my chickens before they hatch. But it's also true that I've had many times where someone's delayed an interview, canceled an interview, and you have to sort of hustle and figure something out and troubleshoot in the field, or just take it on the chin.
David Salerno is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. How has telling stories for you specifically been a source of healing for you?
I think that for me, Bryan, telling stories has been a source of healing because at the end of the day, I know that I've sort of engaged in a process that can be both creatively rewarding and emotionally rewarding, and that usually with the people I'm aligned with, we've done it at a very, very high level, at a very high professional elite level. And knowing that we are telling compelling stories in an artistic way, and that it really stands out in the medium of sports journalism, really, I think is what is a healing thing. Because at the end of the day, I'm lucky in that I get to have a career, and hopefully still have a career, fighting through the pandemic, that I enjoy and that I'm passionate about. That's not the case for over 90% of, I would say, the average American. And this was really, hammered home to me by my older siblings, Stephen and Stacy. He's an attorney for the Department of Defense. She's a child psychologist. That's not always the case for most people. So I think it really was a source of healing for me, particularly in the last 18 months, because I knew it was something worth fighting for, not just jumping ship and switching careers because the pandemic has affected me one way or another, but fighting for that career because it was a career worth fighting for. In understanding that those stories I was telling could not only be inspiring to other people, but also to me, because I felt I was doing something of value and I was doing something that nourished my soul.
Where did that fight, that resilience that you're talking about, where did it originate?
I would say that it originated within my family of origin. I mean, I think it's the way that I was always going to end up being as a person, but in particular, from my father with his fight through cancer. He was diagnosed in 1980, and he responded as well to lymphoma treatments as he could for the better part of a decade and a half before succumbing to the disease a week before my 21st birthday. And seeing him manage his career and work through some of his own difficulties. And he wasn't perfect. My parents ended up getting divorced when I was the only one left in the house. The two older kids were gone. I was 16. But understanding how he fought with some pretty grit and determination to maintain his career, support his family, and not really complain about that. He complained about other things and could be a pain about other things, but about that, he fought, and he fought hard, he fought long, and that had an intense and indelible impact on me, and still does to this day.
How much of what you do today is, in essence, a way to make your dad proud?
I think that has been something that has been a very big part of my academic and professional career since he passed away. Unfortunately, while it's lent some positivity, where my intensity is paid off in some success or high grades or awards with work, it's also been something I've been a little too hard on myself about, to the point that I think some people close to me would say, when I want to beat myself up, put down the bat and pick up the feather. I think that sometimes I would say that if I didn't perform a certain way and get straight A's, or this feature didn't turn out a particular way, or this at work didn't turn out a particular way, or I didn't work out well enough at the gym this day well enough, that I was dishonoring him. So unfortunately, it's been a double-edged sword. And through the years, and as I've matured and become a father myself, I've been able to soften that harsher edge. But it is something I admit I've grappled with for the better part of 25 years.
What do you think your dad would have said after you pulled off that story we were talking about, how you got everybody in the appropriate interview chairs and you absolutely nailed it?
I think he would have said, "Well, David, that was a hell of a thing, wasn't it? You really worked that one over, huh?" I'm trying to think of his precise words. I think he would have had a little bit of a smile, and it showed some pride. I think he had a difficult time expressing those emotions, but I think, was he still alive and I was sharing that story with my family and parents, he would have been very pleased. Even though it was hard for him to express those things, I think he would have been immensely proud. I know that the rest of my family was, very much so.
David, you and I have something in common. We both lost our dads to cancer. I was 16 when I lost mine, and so much as I hear you talk about the struggles and the tribulations and the heartache of losing someone, that has been everything as far as the work ethic that I hear from you, and wanting to brandish that fight that he had, like my dad had. And my dad wanted to be around for my sister's wedding and the major life events that would happen, and unfortunately he wasn't able to do that, but he did fight 4 years longer with this cancer that he had than the doctors proposed. So he was able to say, "Hey, you think I only got 1 year? I got 5 years." And just the fact that he was able to do that is everything to me, like it is for you. And so
Sure.
I got to say, David, I am, and getting to know you and getting to learn about your story, I am completely moved by what you do. And I am motivated and inspired by just your strength and how you've kind of carried the baton in a way, and are doing it in such a way where you continue to honor your dad. Because what more do we want? We want our dad's validation, and we're not going to get it necessarily in the flesh, but we're living it out every day.
Oh, completely. And I'm so sorry to hear that you had to go through that. That you had, if my math is right, that you were 12 years old when you learned about this.
Yeah.
I was 14 when I was told that everyone else in the family tried to protect me from it for as long as they could.
Yeah, same thing.
It was, and I know that's something that you can't really ever get over. Just know that I share a lot of empathy with you, but that struggle of letting it inspire you without feeling that you could dishonor them if you don't do A, B, or C, is something that, listen, I've talked about with everyone from my siblings to my mom to my best friends to my wife to my therapist, and all of them are like, yeah, that's something you got to try to soften. And I admit that has been a harder chore and struggle in the last year and a half, because despite whatever talent or desire or ability to work hard that an individual might have, the pandemic and the economy is not necessarily going to bow down to you or bow down to that. Not at all in most cases. So that has been something that is in the last year and a half, it has been also a further fight and something I've still had to try to refine.
Yeah, well said, because we want to be able to control, and there's these uncontrollables, like you said, that make the fight, the resilience, the work ethic, it puts it on pause, or we're not able to really deep and dive into it when you have these external forces that are going on that are outside of our control, like you said, that have happened in the last 18 months. All I know is that I am a better person after getting to talk with you. And I know everybody who watches this is going to be moved in a better person
And
for it.
if you have any other questions or any other things, I still have some more time, Bryan, if you want to go over anything else or.
Let's do this. Let me ask you one. I had one on my mind here, because there is, I was looking at a lot of the documentaries that you've been a part of, and one of the more recent ones, if I'm not mistaken, David, is the one with Ron Artest.
Correct. Yes.
Yes. So people, obviously, sports fans are familiar with his story, and he had such a tough upbringing, and then he channeled that into making a name for himself in college at St. John's, and then going on to the NBA. And you had such a great point of view perspective of being able to document his struggle, his story, and the way in which he turned his life around. What was it canvassing that from your perspective?
First, I want to say, a huge shout out to the director of that film, Johnny Sweet, whose baby that was. You could say that I was one of the doctors in the delivery room if he was the mother, if that makes sense. I was one of the co-producers on that. I shot some stuff in the field. I helped out with some, outlining scripting, but that was very much his baby. We were thrilled that it got nominated for an Emmy. Unfortunately, we lost to a huge Hollywood director in 2020. Antoine Fuqua of Equalizer fame, who did like the 1000th Muhammad Ali doc. Not that we're bitter or anything.
No,
we're not. It's tough when you're up against a Hollywood director who, hangs out with Denzel Washington.
exactly.
I think that the way that John canvassed that, and the way that I was able to help in my small part to refine some of the things he did, or even to just give some ideas that he just did, that Johnny Sweet did brilliantly, was really to focus on the humanity of both approaching the individual to share their story and finding a really organic, humane way to tell that story once the person's agreed. And always have that sort of in the back of your mind, whilst also trying to figure out very creative ways to, as Johnny did so well with music and the geography of where he came from. I think that was so critical, is looking at everything from what made this human being who they are, but not just focusing on the external things that sort of were obvious to everyone, but looking at influences from his family to the music to the neighborhood where he grew up. And I think that that's what Johnny did brilliantly, and I was thrilled to be a part of and to be able to augment the things that he founded.
Yeah, Johnny, absolutely a legend. You certainly, being able to work with him, you guys made a masterpiece, and that's your MO, is anything that Johnny touches, certainly you, David, it turns into like this Picasso painting. And I honestly think that one day, for someone like yourself who's always telling somebody else's story, perhaps the camera, and this is just a little nugget of that, but in a more professional setting with editing and cameras and all sorts of different bells and whistles, that a story could be done on you. And I think a lot of people would watch it. Sign me up to that midnight watching. David Salerno, I'm Bryan Fenley. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Really appreciate it, Bryan. Thank you.